I've always been drawn to the mountains. There's something about their rugged beauty that speaks to my soul. So when my friends and I decided to tackle the highest peak in the range, I was thrilled. We trained hard for months, honing our skills and building our endurance, and finally, the day arrived. We set out before dawn, our headlamps casting eerie shadows on the rocky trail. As we ascended higher and higher, the air grew thinner and colder, but we pushed on, driven by the thrill of the climb and the promise of the summit. It was just before noon when we finally reached the top. The view was breathtaking, and for a moment I forgot about the biting wind and the chill in my bone. That's when I saw them, two figures standing just beyond the edge of the peak. At first, I thought they were other climbers, but something about them seemed off. They were both dressed in old-fashioned gear, their faces obscured by goggles and hoods, and despite the freezing temperatures, they didn't seem to be affected by the cold at all. As I watched, they turned and vanished into thin air. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Had I imagined it, or had we just encountered something truly supernatural on the mountain? We quickly packed up our gear and started our descent, eager to get off the mountain and away from whatever we had seen. But as we descended, I could feel that we were being watched. It wasn't until we reached the base of the mountain that we realized something was seriously wrong. One of our team members was missing. Panic set in as we realized that one of our team members was missing. We frantically searched the area, calling out his name, but there was no answer. The wind howled around us, carrying our voices away into the vastness of the mountain. We knew that time was of the essence. With each passing moment, the chances of finding our friend alive grew slimmer. We formed a search party, each of us scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of him. The hours stretched on, and fatigue set in. Our muscles ached and our throats were raw from shouting, but still we pressed on, determined to find our missing friend. As night fell, we built a makeshift camp and huddled together for warmth. The darkness was oppressive, and the silence was broken only by the sound of the wind and the occasional cry of a bird. Despite our exhaustion, none of us could sleep. We were haunted by the memory of the two figures we had seen on the summit, and the feeling that we were being watched. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountain, we set out again. We scoured every inch of the terrain, calling out our friend's name until our voices were hoarse. But still, there was no sign of him. As the days wore on, hope began to fade. We started to realize that we might never find our friend alive. And as we retraced our steps up the mountain, I still could feel that we were being followed. It wasn't until we reached the summit once again that I understood what was happening. The two figures were there again, standing just beyond the edge of the peak. This time, they didn't vanish into thin air. Instead, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the mist. I knew then that we were dealing with something beyond our understanding, and I knew that our search for our friend was far from over. As we continued our search, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. It was as if an unseen presence was following us, lurking just beyond our sight. At night, we would huddle together in our tents, listening to the sound of the wind and the creaking of the rocks. But there was something else too, a faint whispering, as if someone was speaking just beyond our hearing. We tried to dismiss it as our imaginations, but as the days went by, the whispering grew louder and more persistent. It was as if the mountains themselves were trying to communicate with us. One evening, as we sat around our campfire, the whispering grew louder until it became a clear voice. It was a voice we all recognized, the voice of our missing friend. We jumped up, scanning the darkness for any sign of him, but there was nothing, just the empty mountain landscape. The voice continued to speak, telling us that he was lost in the mist, and that he needed our help. We searched frantically, calling out his name, but there was no answer. As we settled back around the campfire, the whispering grew fainter, until it faded away altogether. We were left with the eerie feeling that we had been in the presence of something otherworldly. The next day, as we continued our search, we came across an old mountaineering shelter. Inside, We found an old journal that had been left behind by a group of climbers who had attempted the peak decades ago. As we read through the journal, we came across an entry that made our blood run cold. It described encountering two ghostly figures on the summit who had warned the climbers to turn back before disappearing into the mist. It was then that we realized the truth. The two figures we had seen were the ghosts of the climbers who had died on the peak years before, and our friend was lost in the same mist that had claimed their lives. We knew then that we had to be cautious. We were dealing with forces beyond our understanding, and our very lives were at risk. But we couldn't give up on our friend. We had to find him, no matter the cost. We set out early the next morning, determined to find our missing friend and make our way down the mountain. The mist was thick, and the wind howled around us as we made our way higher and higher and higher. As we ascended, the whispering started up again, louder and more insistent than before. We tried to ignore it, but it was impossible to shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for us to make a wrong move. The mist grew denser until we could barely see our hands in front of our faces. We huddled together, clinging to our ropes, and tried to stay calm. But every step felt like a step into the unknown. And then, just as suddenly as it had descended, the mist began to clear. We found ourselves on a narrow ridge, with sheer drops on either side. And there, just ahead of us, we saw our friend. He was standing at the edge of the ridge, his face obscured by goggles and a hood. We called out to him, but he didn't seem to hear us. He just stood there, staring out into the empty space beyond the ridge. We started to make our way towards him, but then he suddenly turned and started to walk away. We called out to him again, but he didn't respond. We knew then that something was wrong. We started to follow him, moving as quickly as we could without risking our own safety. But the ridge was narrow and treacherous, and we could feel the wind pulling at us, threatening to drag us off the mountain. And then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, our friend was gone. We searched frantically, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. We were left with the terrible realization that we were now truly alone on the mountain, with no way to call for help and no way to escape. The only thing we could do was to keep moving forward into the darkness. As we descended further down the mountain, the whispers and eerie feelings continued to haunt us. We were all on edge, barely speaking to each other and constantly looking over our shoulders. We tried to stay focused on finding our way back to civilization, but it seemed as if the mountain itself was working against us. We encountered one obstacle after another, from treacherous rock formations to sudden snowstorms. And then, just as we thought things couldn't get any worse, we saw them again. The two figures standing on a nearby peak, watching us with their dark goggles and hooded faces. We tried to ignore them, but their presence was impossible to ignore. They seemed to be drawing closer and closer to us, despite the treacherous terrain we were navigating. At one point, we took refuge in a small cave, hoping to shelter from the biting wind and freezing temperatures. But as we huddled together in the darkness, we heard something moving outside. At first, we thought it was an animal. But then we heard the whispers again, louder and more urgent than before. And then we saw them, standing just outside the entrance to the cave. We tried to call out to them, to demand answers for what was happening to us. But they just stood there, watching us, as the whispers grew louder and more terrifying. We were trapped, with no way out, and no hope of rescue. We tried to stay strong, but it was becoming increasingly clear that we were not alone on the mountain. Something was haunting us, something that wanted us to stay there forever. As the ghosts continued to haunt us, we realized that we needed to figure out what they wanted. We huddled together in the cave, trying to come up with a plan. That's when we remembered something we had read before the climb. There were stories of climbers who had disappeared on the mountain, never to be seen again. We dug through our packs, searching for any information we could find. And that's when we found it. A journal left behind by a climber who had attempted the same peak years before. As we read through the pages, a sense of dread washed over us. The climber had also encountered the ghosts and had been unable to escape their grasp. But there was a clue in the journal, something that the climber had discovered before he vanished. He had found an old piece of climbing gear buried deep in the snow that seemed to be connected to the ghosts. We knew what we had to do. We set out again, searching the mountain for any sign of the old gear. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a mound of snow marked by a few pieces of rusted metal. We began to dig, our fingers numbed by the cold, until we uncovered an old ice axe, and as we held it in our hands, we knew that we were onto something. But before we could figure out what to do next, the ghosts appeared once again. They seemed to be angry now, as if we were getting too close to the truth. We ran, the old ice axe clutched tightly in our hands as we tried to outrun the ghosts and make our way off the mountain. We knew that time was running out and that we had to figure out the mystery before it was too late. As we descended the mountain, the ghosts continued to pursue us relentlessly, but we knew that we were onto something with the old ice axe. We decided to seek the help of a local historian, hoping that they might be able to shed some light on the mystery. After hours of searching, we finally found someone who had studied the history of the mountain. The historian listened intently to our story and examined the old ice axe. They confirmed that it was indeed a piece of climbing gear from a group of climbers who had disappeared on the mountain years before. But there was more to the story. The group had been attempting a daring new route up the peak and had taken with them a valuable artifact that they had planned to leave at the summit. The artifact was said to hold immense power, and the climbers had believed that leaving it on the summit would bring them good luck on future climbs. But something had gone horribly wrong. The historian explained that the artifact was cursed, and that it had brought about the demise of the entire group. Their bodies had never been found, but their spirits had been trapped on the mountain, forever searching for the lost artifact. We realized that the ghosts we had encountered were the spirits of the climbers seeking to reclaim the artifact that had led to their demise. And with the old ice axe in our possession, we knew that we were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. We set out once again, determined to solve the mystery once and for all. The ghosts appeared before us, more agitated than ever, but this time we had a plan. We used the old ice axe to dig through the snow and uncover the artifact. As we lifted it from the ground, a bright light filled the air, and the ghosts let out a final chilling scream. And then they were gone. We were left standing on the mountain, the artifact in our hands, and a sense of relief washing over us. We had uncovered the truth and put the spirits of the climbers to rest. As we descended the mountain, carrying the artifact with us, we could feel a sense of sadness. Our friend was still missing, and we had no idea what had happened to him. We notified the authorities, and search and rescue teams were dispatched to comb the mountain for any sign of him. Days turned into weeks, and we began to lose hope. Just when we had given up all hope of finding him, a hiker stumbled upon a patch of torn clothing and a broken trekking pole. It was our friend's gear. We raced to the spot and soon found his body buried under a pile of snow. The grief we felt was indescribable. We had lost a friend, a brother, and a fellow adventurer. But as we mourned his loss, we knew that we had to carry on. We had uncovered a mystery that had haunted the mountain for years and put the spirits of the lost climbers to rest. We made a pact to never forget our fallen friend, and to always remember the lessons we had learned on that fateful climb. We knew that the mountains could be treacherous and unforgiving, but we also knew that they held a special kind of magic that would always draw us back. As we looked out at the majestic peaks in the distance, we felt a sense of reverence and respect. We knew that the ghosts of the mountain would always be watching, but we also knew that we had earned their respect. We had braved the elements, faced our fears, and uncovered the truth. And in the end, that was all that mattered. After the intense experience on the mountain, the next few weeks were a blur. We took some time to process everything that had happened and to mourn the loss of our friend. But eventually, we began to move on. We returned to our daily lives, but the memories of the mountain stayed with us. We made a pact to never forget what we had learned on the climb. We would always respect the power of the mountains and never take our safety for granted. As for the artifact, we decided that it was best to return it to its rightful place. We made a pilgrimage back to the mountain and buried it deep in the snow, hoping that it would stay hidden forever. And as we descended the mountain for the final time, we felt a sense of closure. We had faced our fears, uncovered a mystery, and put the spirits of the climbers to rest. But more than that, we had formed an unbreakable bond. The experience had brought us closer together, and we knew that we would always have each other's backs, no matter what challenges we faced in the future. As we drove away from the mountain, I look back at the peak, feeling a sense of gratitude for all that it had given us. We had encountered ghosts, yes, but we had also found something far more precious: the strength and resilience of the human spirit.